kids are usually love to play and very cute, but on this case now we are going to discuss the most notorious kids in our today's videos. They have committed horrific murders that are dark enough to be the plot of a Hollywood horror movie, none of which they are legally old enough. Now we are looking back at the most notorious killer kids in history. Now let's start with John Venables and Robert Thompson. In the winter of 1993, John Venables and Robert Thompson, both 10 years old at the time, became the youngest convicted murderers in England. On February 12, 1993, the boys abducted 2-year-old James Bulger from a local shopping mall. The boys brought him to a local railroad track where they brutally beat the boy before using an iron bar to do most of the damage. They finally left him to die on the railroad tracks. CCTV footage of Venables and Thompson abducting 2-year-old James Bulger. Somehow, despite the grisly murder, both boys were released from prison in 2001 when they turned 18 years old and now live under new identities. Eric Smith, after enduring years of bullying of his glasses and red hair, 13-year-old Eric Smith finally snapped one day and murdered 4-year-old Derek Roby on August 2, 1993. Both boys were walking to their summer day camp when Smith decided to lure the young boy into the woods. There, he strangled and killed the boy using a large rock. Roby's body was found soon after, and Smith was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced the most a juvenile could be, at least 9 years in prison. Since then, Smith has been denied parole 8 times since 2002 and most recently in April of this year. He won't be eligible again until 2018. Mary Bell. On May 25, 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Mary Flora Bell lured 4-year-old Martin Brown to an abandoned home in Newcastle, England. Bell then strangled him to death and soon returned to carve an M on his chest. 2 months later, Bell and her friend Norma were on the prowl again, this time taking 3-year-old Brian Howe into their possession, where they also strangled him to death. The two deaths were eventually connected and Bell was charged with 2 counts of manslaughter. After 12 years, when Bell was 23, she was released from prison and also given a new identity to start a new life. Lionel Tate. On July 28, 1999, Lionel Tate's mother was babysitting 6-year-old Tiffany Unuk when she decided to go upstairs to watch television. Once she left the room, 13-year-old Lionel began abusing the young girl, mostly by stomping on her. After nearly 45 minutes with the girl, Lionel went to get his mom after she stopped breathing and blamed it on a wrestling accident. Tate was sentenced to life in prison, becoming the youngest American ever to face the charge. Since mental competency was not conducted before the trial, the charge was overturned as Tate was released from prison only 3 years later with 1 year house arrest and 10 years probation. Jesse Pomeroy. Beginning in 1871, when he was only 11 years old, James Pomeroy began luring younger boys into remote areas where he would torture them by beating them or cutting them with a knife. As Pomeroy's family moved around Massachusetts, James continued his attacks on young boys. He was eventually arrested and tried in juvenile court, where he was sentenced and sent to a reform school. When he turned 14, James was sent to live with his mother in South Boston when soon after he murdered 10-year-old girl Katie Curran in March of 1874. Pomeroy was sentenced to death, but it would be overturned and changed to life in prison shortly after. Joshua Phillips. In the fall of 1998, 14-year-old Joshua Phillips allegedly was playing with a baseball bat when he struck 8-year-old Maddie Clifton in the head. He later told police that he stabbed her in the neck when she wouldn't stop crying. Phillips then took her body and hid her in his waterbed mattress, where she remained for more than a week. It wasn't until Joshua's mother noticed a leak in the bed and went to investigate that she found the body of the young girl and called the police. Phillips would later be charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Alyssa Bustamante. 15-year-old Missouri teen Alyssa Bustamante showed all the signs of a troubled teen, from cutting herself to attempting suicide. With her depression and deeply rooted mental issues unresolved, the emotions grew into anger one day in 2009. Bustamante lured her neighbor, 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton, into the woods where she strangled her before slitting her neck and wrists. She buried Olton in the ground in one of 2 holes she prepared earlier in the week. Alyssa would eventually plead guilty to the murder, claiming that she wanted to know what it was like to kill someone. Bustamante was charged with first-degree murder and tried as an adult, getting a life imprisonment sentence. Craig Price. Back in 1989, 15-year-old Rhode Island teen Craig Price brutally stabbed and killed 39-year-old Joan Heaton and her 2 daughters, 10-year-old Jennifer and 8-year-old Melissa. Price was already a suspect in a previous murder investigation, and when police came to question him, he was found with wounds on his body and the murder weapons in his room with dried blood. Before his 16th birthday, Craig was convicted on 4 counts of murder as a minor, which meant he would be released by the age of 21. However, he was sentenced to an additional 25 years in prison thanks to a group called Citizens opposed to the release of Craig Price. Willie Bosket. Notorious killer Willie Bosket was troubled from the moment he was born, as his father was also a murderer serving life in prison in Milwaukee. Bosket committed dozens of crimes around New York City, and eventually his first murder by the time he was 15 years old. He first shot and killed 2 men during separate robbery attempts back in 1978. He also killed a transit employee before getting caught. Bosket pleaded guilty to the murders, but since he was only 15, he was tried as a minor and received 5 years in a youth facility. His light sentence would bring about historic change, as New York would become the first state to change juvenile laws to allow kids as young as 13 to be tried as adults. It was called the Willie Bosket Law. Upon being released, Bosket continued a life of crime, going in and out of jail until finally receiving a life sentence in 1989. They are the list most notorious kid.